Much needs to be done to bolster our defenses. October 20th marked the 60th anniversary of the brutal conflict of 1962, but much work remains to be done to free our territory from Chinese occupation. Just 10 days before the 60th anniversary of the India-China conflict, General Manoj Kumar Pandey, Indian Army Chief, said in a dialogue, "If I have to describe it in a single sentence, I will say that the situation is stable but unpredictable. It is obvious that despite the flourishing business and trade ties between the two nations, the border animosity with China is still going on. This enmity reminds us of the sacrifices of our Jawans." For a better understanding of this issue, let's travel back to the years 1947 to 1962. Jawaharlal Nehru, the country's first prime minister, received a timely warning from the army. Major General D.K. Pallat claims in his book, Major General A.A. Rudra, his service in 3 armies and 2 world wars, that Sir Robert Lockhart, the first commander-in-chief of independent India, presented Nehru with a thorough strategic plan for border security but was met with the stern response, "We don't need a defense plan. Our policy is ahimsa. We foresee no military threat. Scrap the army. The police are good enough to meet our security needs." This was the consensus of the majority of the cabinet, with the exception of Krishna Menon. Morarji Desai, the then finance minister, believed that increased military investment and army modernization would kill Gandhi's dream. Starting in the late 1950s, the border conflict became worse. The Dalai Lama was compelled to flee Lhasa after China occupied Tibet. India granted him refuge and acknowledged his government in exile in 1959. Rising tensions between India and China culminated in the war in October 1962. Some 7,000 Indian soldiers and officers were either killed or captured in the war. China also suffered losses of about 2,000 soldiers. Nehru was so outraged by the attack that he sought help from United States President John F. Kennedy. His uneasiness used to grow into restlessness as he wrote letter after letter to the U.S. president. Meanwhile, on November 20th, China declared a unilateral ceasefire. Its army returned from Tezpur in Assam, though still occupied 38,000 square kilometers of our territory. We have yet to take it back. New Delhi was in an unusual state before the conflict broke. General S. Thimayya led the country's army from 1957 to 1961. But his relationship with then Defense Minister Krishna Menon was strained. He had even resigned at a point during this tension, but Nehru persuaded him to withdraw his resignation. Meanwhile, Marshal Ayub Khan, a friend and colleague of General Thimayya in colonial India, conducted a coup in Pakistan in 1958. Thereafter, Nehru felt the Indian military had to be brought under constitutional control if India's democracy were not to be jeopardized. He also accomplished this. This raises the question of whether democracy and sovereignty can be separated. Certainly not. However, there was a lack of necessary coordination between the army brass and political leaders. Even top-ranking officers of the army were divided on many issues.